When paramedics found Willie Mae Big Mama Thornton in a Los Angeles boarding house on a sweltering July day in 1984, they barely recognized her. The once formidable blues woman, 6 feet tall and well over 300 pounds in her prime, weighed under 100 pounds at her death. It was a shocking transformation for a singer whose very nickname was Big Mama, earned as much for her mighty physique as for the thunderous voice that could rattle juke joint walls after death. That voice had launched rock and roll itself, belting out the original hit Hound Dog years before Elvis Presley ever heard it. It had growled the blues so fiercely that a young Janis Joplin once begged her for the chance to sing one of Big Mama's songs. Yet Thornton's life was no simple tale of influence and success. It was a wild roller coaster of musical brilliance and staggering amounts of heartbreak. It was a classic blues saga of talent, exploitation, defiance, and ultimately tragedy, unfolding across the segregated theatres of the 1940s South to the rock festivals of the psychedelic 60s and beyond. Big Mama Thornton died the way she lived, on her own fierce terms, with a blues in her soul and a legacy that would only be fully understood sometime after she was gone. Welcome to Rock and Roll Mysteries. Born in rural Alabama in 1926, Willie Mae Thornton learned about grueling hardship very early, but the tough times at least had a brilliant soundtrack. Her father was a Baptist minister, her mother a church singer, and Willie Mae spent her childhood immersed in gospel music. By her own admission, she loved those spirituals, but didn't do too much singing in church. Instead, she soaked up the blues that drifted through the dusty outskirts of Montgomery. As a girl, she taught herself to play the harmonica by watching her elder brother, and she had banged out rhythms on drums whenever she got the chance. Music came naturally to her, self-taught and straight from the gut. My singing comes from my experience, my own experience, Thornton later said. An experience, however harsh, was about to become her greatest teacher. In 1939, when Willie Mae was barely in her teens, tragedy swung its sickle. Her mother fell gravely ill with tuberculosis, and young Willie Mae devoted herself to nursing her, to no avail. After her mother died, the family slid deeper into poverty. Willie Mae, just 14, quit school. She was only in 3rd grade at the time and took the only job she could find, the grim task of cleaning spittoons in a local tavern. The work was filthy and the pay meager. Some nights she went to bed hungry. Sometimes I didn't even have nothing to eat, she remembered. Even a soda cracker tasted like cheese and cake. In that smoke-filled tavern, though, fate found her. One evening, the scheduled singer didn't show up. One version of the story says the woman was too drunk to perform, but whatever the case, the desperate owner invited teenage Willie Mae to have a crack at the stage. Dressed in her work clothes and smelling of soap and tobacco juice, she opened her mouth and let loose a voice like no one had ever heard. Patrons who had been ignoring the scrawny kid cleaning the floor now stared in awe as she belted out blues standards with raw, soul-deep power. It was Willie Mae's first real performance, and it brought the house down. In that instant, a star flickered to life in the unlikeliest of places. Thornton's impromptu debut lit a fire inside her. Music was her calling, and she would pursue it even if it meant defying her strict father and the expectations for a young black girl in the 1940s Deep South. The more she sang the blues around the house, the angrier her father grew. He was very religious, and blues was the devil's music to a preacher. My daddy wanted to get me with the razor strop whenever he caught me humming blues, she later recalled. Willie Mae's solution was as direct as the lyrics of a barroom blues. She ran away to sing. Before I get into Big Mama's incredible runaway story of life on the road, be sure to have a look at my store page, where I've got a few new shirts now on offer. 3 new designs are up featuring Debbie Harry, Jimi Hendrix, and Cass Elliot. They come in a whole range of sizes, right up to 5XL, so even Big Mama Thornton could wear one with style, and there are plenty of colours also available. Great quality shirts too, made with premium cotton, very nice stuff. And they start from $25, or about £21 in UK money. Have a look and pick one up for yourself, or as a birthday gift for a music-mad friend. They are all totally exclusive and designed by me personally, so they can't be found anywhere else. No danger of showing up in the same gear as someone else at your next groovy party. Anyway, thanks to everyone who has bought one so far. Let's get on with the show. In 1941, at about age 14, Thornton left home and joined a travelling show out of Atlanta called Sammy Green's Hot Harlem Revue, an all-black variety troupe that roamed the segregated South. It was a rough and tumble life. Long bus rides, one-nighters in tobacco country theatres, segregation laws dictating where they could eat and sleep, but Willie Mae thrived on it. Billed as the new Bessie Smith, she belted out blues numbers with a voice as big as her personality. Night after night, the teenage girl in hand-me-down dresses and worn-out shoes stole the show. She left everyone in awe with her raw, soulful performances. As part of the review, Willie Mae learned to hypnotize an audience. She was singing, dancing, even cracking jokes, and she learned to survive on the road. The tour snaked across Georgia, the Carolinas, and down into Texas, playing everywhere from big city auditoriums to rural tent shows. For 7 years, she lived out of a suitcase, sorting out her craft alongside seasoned bluesmen and vaudeville comics. By the late 1940s, she had grown into a rather striking figure, well over 6 feet tall in heels, with broad shoulders and a don't fuck with me attitude to match. She could drink and cuss and keep up in any jam session, and she had taught herself to accompany her singing on drums and harmonica, a very rare talent for a female performer at the time. But life on the road wasn't all applause and encores. The pay from Sammy Green's review was paltry, and sometimes it didn't come at all. Thornton later said that the show's managers failed to pay her what she was owed, and eventually her patience ran out. After years of bringing down the house as the review's star attraction, Big Mama, as she was beginning to be known, had little to show for it financially. So in 1948, she made a big decision. She left the travelling show and put down roots in Houston, Texas, which was actually a burgeoning hotspot for rhythm and blues. Houston's Third Ward was alive with juke joints and music halls in the post-war years, and a big-voiced blueswoman could find plenty of work. Thornton quickly made a name in the local circuit with her growling, gospel-soaked vocals and her magnetising stage charisma. She was loud, she was brash, and she broke every stereotype of how a female singer should act. At a time when most women in music were expected to be demure, girl-next-door types, or sequined crooners, Willie Mae Thornton swaggered on stage in men's pants and work boots. She laughed off catcalls and gave as good as she got in backstage wisecracks. By her early 20s, she was carrying herself with the tough confidence of a road-hardened blues veteran, which in truth she already was. It wasn't long before Houston's music impresarios took notice. Don Roby, the savvy and fearsome owner of Peacock Records, reportedly first heard Big Mama at a Houston club and was blown away. Here was a woman who could sing like a hurricane, growling low notes that made the floor vibrate, then slinging a throat-shredding shout to bring a crowd to its feet. Even more impressive to Roby was Thornton's musicianship. She could accompany herself on drums or knock out a solo on the harmonica mid-song. Roby, a flamboyant black entrepreneur with a reputation for ruthless business practices, saw potential dollar signs in Big Mama. In 1951, he signed her to a 5-year recording contract with Peacock Records. This was Thornton's first real shot at recording stardom, but working with Roby came at a price. The Peacock boss was known to cheat his artists on royalties and even take writers' credit for songs that weren't his. And he wasn't comfortable with Big Mama's personal life either. Thornton was believed by almost everyone to be lesbian, a fact that Roby, sadly justifiably given the era, feared might alienate audiences or cause trouble. Big Mama didn't care. She refused to downplay her identity. Offstage, she dressed in men's jackets and slacks, wore her hair slicked back, and even flirted openly with women. Roby grumbled, but he needed Big Mama's talent on his label. He kept her booked nightly at his own Houston club, the Bronze Peacock, and sent her out on the Chitlin circuit, that network of black clubs from the juke joints of Mississippi to New York's Cotton Club, where audiences loved her unrestrained style. In 1952, Big Mama Thornton got the opportunity that would change her life and in many ways change American music forever. She joined bandleader Johnny Otis's traveling R&B review and headed west to perform at the famed Apollo Theater in New York. In Harlem, she was introduced for the first time as Big Mama Thornton, a nickname that captured her plus-size persona and powerhouse voice. She walked out onto the Apollo stage that night, a relative unknown, and came back for so many encores that she went from opening act to headliner within the week. New York's Apollo had seen its share of blues belters, but nothing quite like Big Mama. She could bring a crowd to its knees, then crack them up with a raunchy one-liner. It was during this Apollo stint that a pair of young songwriters in the audience took notice of her. Their names were Jerry Lieber and Mike Stoller, and though the pair were barely out of their teens, they were already hustling to make it in the record business. The two young Jewish kids had set themselves up in LA by this time, but they hung around backstage after a show and politely introduced themselves to Thornton. They then told her they had written a song just for her. Big Mama eyed the slick and suited duo a bit skeptically, but she was always game for new material, so she said she was game to give the tune a go. A few weeks later, in August 1952, they all met at a studio in Los Angeles to cut the track. The song was a bawdy 12-bar blues number called Hound Dog. Lieber and Stoller had penned it very much with Big Mama's fiery persona and voice in mind. Mind you, they had to pluck up some courage to ask her in the first place. As they later remembered, in her combat boots and oversized overalls, she was pretty frightening. Thornton indeed looked ready to pounce that day in the studio, singing in rolled-up dungarees, her hair wrapped in a bandana. But when the band launched into the groove, she flashed a gold-toothed grin and immediately owned the song outright. The recording of Hound Dog that resulted, which was reportedly done in one take in under 20 minutes, was explosive. Big Mama growled, hollered, and even barked in mock indignation at the no-good man the lyrics warned off her porch. It was risky, raw, and unabashedly sexual, with Thornton ad-libbing over the band's deep blues shuffle. The producers knew they had captured lightning in a bottle. When Hound Dog hit record shops in early 1953, it caused a sensation, or you might even say a shockwave. Big Mama Thornton's version rocketed to #1 on the R&B charts, where it stayed for 7 weeks and sold over 500,000 copies in a matter of months. Listeners had never heard anything quite like it. A woman singing with that kind of visceral power, teasing and taunting in the lyric, "You ain't nothing but a hound dog, quit snooping round my door," and punctuating the beat with hoodoo-inspired whoops. On the flip side of the single, Thornton had contributed her own song, a sassy self-referential track called "They Call Me Big Mama," and this would ensure nobody would forget her name. Suddenly, Willie Mae Thornton from Alabama was a national R&B star. Newspapers ran profiles of the so-called female blues shouter who knocked them dead at the Apollo. She started touring bigger venues, swinging through Chicago, St. Louis, LA, and back down south, singing Hound Dog to packed houses. She even bought herself a flashy car with her newfound earnings, one of the few indulgences she allowed. But just as quickly as it came, Big Mama's moment of crossover glory was snatched away in the most remarkable and, it could be argued, unjust way possible. In 1956, 21-year-old Elvis Presley, already a fast-rising rock sensation, recorded a rockabilly version of Hound Dog that would become a monster hit on the pop charts. Elvis's rendition, with its suggestive hip-shaking, televised to millions, sold 4 million copies and helped make the Mississippi Boy into an international sensation. Meanwhile, Big Mama's original, the very voice that had inspired the now immensely wealthy Lieber and Stoller to write the song, was largely confined to black radio and had earned her only $500 in payment. Thornton would later bitterly recall how everyone around Hound Dog seemed to get rich except her. "I wish now I hadn't thrown in a few hollers to make it go," she said. "Everybody else got paid, but I didn't get mine. Sometimes I got $50 for a whole week singing. Sometimes I didn't. They'd taken everything but my voice." Those words dripped with the frustration of many black artists of her era, whose work was eagerly consumed and often appropriated by white America, while the originators struggled to see a fair share of the rewards. Hound Dog was the most notorious example. Elvis became the crowned king of rock and roll on the back of a song Big Mama Thornton first imbued with all the true grit and swagger that rock and roll implies. He never publicly acknowledged the debt. In fact, when Thornton's team once tried to get her booked on the same bill as Elvis so they could perform Hound Dog together, Elvis's camp refused. According to Big Mama, Elvis went further than merely rebuffing her. She said they wanted to bill us on the same bill, but he refused, saying nothing that a colored person could do for him but shine shoes. By the end of the 1950s, Elvis Presley's star was in the firmament, and Big Mama Thornton, despite her enormous talent, was slipping off the radar of mainstream music. This turn of events might have broken a lesser spirit, but Big Mama Thornton was nothing if not a tenacious lady. In fact, at this point in her story, you can really imagine her raising those massive fists of hers, just like she did on stage, and barking out one of her trademark laughs, even if it was a bitter one. Life might knock her down, but it wasn't about to shut her up. By 1957, rock and roll's new wave had indeed eclipsed the blues in popularity. Thornton's contract with Peacock ended, and the hits seemed to have dried up as quickly as they came. She left Houston and drifted to California, where she performed sporadically in Los Angeles, and then up the coast in San Francisco, where an old friend, blues guitarist Clarence Gatemouth Brown, invited her to sit in with his band. There was no big recording deal, no full-time band. She already found herself with none of the trappings of her brief stardom. In the late 1950s, Thornton essentially lived gig to gig, singing in any club that would hire her. Sometimes she got top billing as the once famous Hound Dog originator. Other times she was just a face in all-night jam sessions at rough Oakland bars where knife fights routinely broke out on the dance floor. Money was tight. Big Mama, who had always enjoyed her whiskey and beer, drank even more to soothe the pain of being sidelined by the industry she'd helped fuel. She could be found nursing a bottle of bourbon after hours, playing dominoes or cards with the club's kitchen staff for pocket change. There were rumours that she even did odd jobs, washing dishes in back kitchens or cleaning motel rooms when gigs were scarce. Quite a shocking situation for such a talented performer. The late 50s were also lonely years for Thornton. She had no husband or children. She never did marry. In fact, she never publicly discussed any romantic relationships, though, as I mentioned earlier, it was known in her inner circle that she preferred women. And without a hit record or a savvy manager, she was at the mercy of club owners who might pay her one night and stiff her the next. Once, during these lean times, a club promoter tried to short her payment after a show. Big Mama didn't call a lawyer, she handled it herself, chasing the man down and threatening to beat him, I quote, "with the same broom I just swept your stage with, if he didn't hand over her cash." She had a reputation in the business as a woman who wouldn't hesitate to throw a punch if you crossed her. And in truth, that toughness was born of necessity. It was the only way she knew to survive in a world that hadn't treated her kindly, and frankly never had any intention to. Yet even as Big Mama Thornton's career hit a low ebb, the story was far from over. By the early 1960s, a cultural shift was brewing that would bring her roaring back onto the scene. The same rock revolution that had stolen her thunder was now prompting a new generation to look backwards to the blues. Young white musicians in America and the UK, from Bob Dylan and Janis Joplin to Eric Clapton and the Rolling Stones, were discovering the black blues pioneers and openly idolizing them. The folk and blues revival movement swept up aging legends and gave them new stages to shine on, and Willie Mae Thornton, with her utterly authentic credentials and still marvelous voice, was about to get the break she had been praying for. It would come from a rather unlikely place, the middle-class hippie counterculture of San Francisco, and from a young woman who viewed Big Mama not as competition, but as a hero. By 1965, Big Mama had relocated permanently to the San Francisco Bay Area, then a bubbling cauldron of rock, folk and psychedelic music. Though she was decades older than the Flower Children thronging the Haight-Ashbury, she found a niche in the city's blues scene. The Monterey Jazz Festival, a prestigious annual event in California, began inviting her to perform regularly. European promoters came calling too, and they were keen to showcase authentic American blues abroad. In 1965, Thornton flew overseas as part of the American Folk Blues Festival Tour, joining a company of luminaries like Muddy Waters and Otis Spann on a circuit through England, Germany, and Scandinavia. Audiences in Europe were astonished by the powerful woman in men's pantsuits who could sing spirituals one moment and risque blues the next. The greatest female blues singer of this or any other decade, one British reviewer gushed after watching her command a London concert hall. For Big Mama, after so many hungry years, Europe's adulation felt like vindication. She even enjoyed a bit of tourist luxury, riding in first-class coaches on express trains, eating fine meals the promoters paid for, a far cry from sleeping on Greyhound buses in the 1940s. Perhaps most importantly, around this time, Big Mama crossed paths with a man who, for once, seemingly genuinely valued her artistry without any intent of exploitation. Chris Strachwitz, founder of Arhoolie Records. Strachwitz was a musicologist at heart, devoted to recording unsung American roots musicians. Meeting Thornton in California, he recognized that her talent was undiminished and deserved to be documented for posterity. He offered her studio time and, crucially, creative control. The result was a string of seminal late 1960s recordings that captured Big Mama at full throttle. In 1966, she recorded Big Mama Thornton with the Chicago Blues Band, backed by blues royalty like Muddy Waters and Sam Lightning Hopkins. That same year, she laid down tracks for Big Mama Thornton in Europe, featuring a crack band that included Buddy Guy on guitar. These albums showed that Thornton's voice had grown even richer with age. Dark, smoky, capable of tenderness and menace in equal measure. She roared through stomping blues and even tackled contemporary soul numbers, proving she could adapt to the changing musical landscape. In 1968, Thornton and Arhoolie released what would become a late-career masterpiece, an album titled Ball and Chain. Its title track was an original blues song Big Mama had been performing in clubs, a slow, heavy blues lament she wrote about the pain of love's burden. Ball and Chain was Big Mama's personal favourite among her compositions, a song into which she poured all her hurt and hopes. And in a twist of fate that seemed to echo Hound Dog, this song too would reach the world through the voice of someone else. Yet this time, Big Mama would finally get the credit she was due. The catalyst was Janis Joplin, a young Texas-born singer cutting her teeth in the San Francisco rock scene. Joplin worshipped the blues and counted Bessie Smith and Big Mama Thornton among her idols. One night in 1966, at a little club called the Bowfand on Divisadero Street, Janis Joplin saw Big Mama perform Ball and Chain. The song hit Joplin like a ton of bricks. Here was a blues wail that perfectly suited Joplin's own volcanic voice, which was also soulful, wounded, and defiant. Joplin approached Thornton after the set, practically gushing, and asked for permission to sing Ball and Chain with her band Big Brother and the Holding Company. She promised, as the story goes, that Thornton would get full credit as the writer and a cut of the money if the song ever made it big. Thornton, always protective of her material, sized up the earnest, hard-drinking white girl from Texas and made a decision. She said yes. I told her, go ahead and sing it, Thornton recounted later. Hell, that little girl sings that song. She may also have sensed an opportunity, a second shot at the kind of recognition she missed with Hound Dog. In June 1967, Janis Joplin performed Ball and Chain in a star-making appearance at the Monterey Pop Festival, the apex of the Summer of Love. Joplin threw every ounce of her being into the song, wailing and tearing at the lyrics in a way that stunned the hippie audience. The performance, caught on film, became legendary, the sight of the wild-haired Joplin crying out, "Sit down by my window, baby," in a voice cracked with both fury and fragility. It was a transformative moment in rock, often cited as the point where rock and roll fully reconnected with its blues roots. And if you want to hear more about it, I've got an episode on Janis you can listen to after this one. Check the description or the link popping up on screen now for that. True to her word, Janis Joplin always acknowledged that the song was Big Mama Thornton's. On Big Brother's breakthrough 1968 album, Cheap Thrills, the credits listed Ball and Chain, Willie Mae Thornton, prominently. Joplin spoke in interviews about Thornton's influence, telling Rolling Stone that listening to Big Mama was like having my life railed at me by a woman who's lived 10 of mine. Unlike the Elvis saga, the ball and chain episode turned out to be a blessing for Big Mama. Janis Joplin's hit cover version meant royalty checks finally found their way to Thornton's mailbox. The fine print, however, was complicated. Thornton had recorded Ball and Chain years earlier for a small label, Baytone, which never released it but held the copyright. Initially, that meant Big Mama didn't automatically get publishing royalties from Joplin's recording. But Joplin and her management intervened to ensure Thornton got her due. Big Mama would later confirm that she was paid for Joplin's success. "It's all right, it made me money," Thornton said of Joplin's popular rendition. "At least I got paid for it, and I'm still drawing royalties." After years of seeing others profit off her work, Big Mama finally got a taste of justice. Somehow over the years, a nonsense myth emerged that claimed that Janis ripped off Big Mama over Ball and Chain, but nothing could be further from the truth. The record label tried to squeeze her, but as Thornton said herself many times, Janis always made sure she got what she was due for the song. Maybe the whole Elvis fiasco got mashed up in the cultural memory with this story, I don't know, but I'm putting that one to bed, as Janis really didn't do anything wrong. On the contrary, more than money, Joplin's endorsement brought Thornton a new generation of fans. Suddenly, in the late 60s, hip young white audiences wanted to see the woman who wrote Ball and Chain and originally sang Hound Dog. Thornton found herself sharing concert bills with rock acts like the Grateful Dead and appearing at major rock venues. In September 1968, she took the stage at the Sky River Rock Festival in Washington State, howling the blues to crowds who, moments earlier, had been grooving to Santana and the Dead. And even to those who only knew her songs from Elvis or Janis, Big Mama Thornton on stage was a revelation. Dressed in her trademark baggy men's suit and thick-soled boots, she still cut an imposing figure, joking with the crowd one minute and roaring into a gospel-tinged blues the next. As one critic noted, Joplin married rock and roll with its blues origins, but it was Thornton's voice at the altar. For a few golden years, it seemed Big Mama Thornton was finally having her moment in the sun. Between 1966 and 1971, she recorded a flurry of albums, including Stronger Than Dirt for Mercury Records and The Way It Is for a Willie, a live album from her 1969 West Coast tour, and others. These records kept her visible. In 1969, she even fulfilled a childhood dream by cutting a gospel-flavored album called Saved. After all those mornings, listening to spirituals on the radio and longing to sing them, she poured her heart into hymns like Oh Happy Day and the title track Saved. Saved didn't top the charts, but it was very respected and showed another side of Big Mama's artistry, going back to the church roots that had first nurtured her gift. On the concert circuit, Big Mama was now hailed as a living legend of the blues. At prestigious events like the Ann Arbor Blues Festival and the Newport Jazz Festival, she was introduced with elaborate praise. Ladies and gentlemen, the great Big Mama Thornton, who gave rock and roll its voice, as one MC called it. She shared stages with B.B. King, Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, and Buddy Guy. Watching her stride out and trade licks with these, mostly male peers, was something to behold. Thornton more than held her own, often cheekily referring to herself as the only bitch on the show, but I can sing like a man, a line she'd owned in the old days to silence hecklers and remind audiences that she could outsing just about anyone. By the early 1970s, she had at last earned a measure of widespread respect. Critics who had once overlooked her were writing long retrospective appreciations in magazines, tracing how Big Mama's Hound Dog was a crucial link between rhythm and blues and rock and roll's birth. She even appeared on network television. In 1971, Thornton was a guest on The Dick Cavett Show, bringing the blues into America's living rooms and likely shocking some viewers with her bawdy style. But life had one more cruel plot twist in store for Big Mama. Just as she reclaimed some of the spotlight and stability that had eluded her, her old demons and new hardships came clawing at her heels. The blues had always been her salvation and her curse, and the 1970s would test Willie Mae Thornton in ways as harsh as any lyric she ever sang. Would the indomitable Big Mama keep on singing, or would the blues finally overwhelm her? The final act of her story would prove as heart-rending as any in the blues canon. As the 1970s progressed, the winds of the music industry shifted yet again. The brief blues revival waned as rock music evolved and audiences moved on to new trends. Big Mama Thornton, now in her late 40s, found herself struggling once more to land record deals or high-paying gigs. She continued to tour steadily, often playing club dates and modest blues festivals. But the money was never great. More worrisome, her health began to decline, accelerated by years of hard living. Back in the 1950s, she was known to down bottles of malt liquor or copious shots of whiskey during shows, sometimes joking, "This is my medicine." By the late 70s, the cumulative toll of decades of heavy drinking was stark. She developed severe liver problems, and her once massive frame began to shrink as illness set in. Friends noticed that the life of the party who could drink anyone under the table now looked frail and exhausted off stage. Still, Big Mama pressed on. She was determined to sing as long as she had breath in her body, even if that body was betraying her. In 1977, disaster struck. Thornton was involved in a serious automobile accident that left her badly injured. She spent months in the hospital recuperating, her career on hold while broken bones healed. Many assumed this would end her performing days. How could the nearly 50-year-old singer, now physically weakened, ever command a stage again? But they underestimated Big Mama's resilience. Astonishingly, by 1979, she was back in action, booked to appear at the San Francisco Blues Festival. When the moment came, she had to be helped up the steps to the stage, a stout assistant on each arm. The crowd murmured in concern, seeing her shuffle slowly, clearly unwell. But then the band struck a chord, and Big Mama Thornton straightened up at the microphone. She delivered a marvelous performance that day, pouring every ounce of strength into her blues, even as sweat beaded on her gaunt face. Observers said it was as if she willed herself into a second wind, refusing to let the audience see her falter. True to form, she even cracked a joke about her condition. "I ain't as big as I used to be," she drawled, "but I can still sing loud." The crowd howled its approval. It was a triumphant yet poignant sight, the lioness in winter roaring proudly despite her wounds. Behind the scenes, however, Big Mama's life was unraveling. The medical bills from her accident and her ongoing health issues had drained what little savings she had. Unbeknownst to her, an unscrupulous manager had also mismanaged and probably stolen money she'd earned in the good years. In a brutally candid interview in the early 1980s, Thornton vented her bitterness about this betrayal. The former manager, she named him as Jim Moore, had kept control of her finances and left her essentially broke. "I ain't never gonna forget him," she said angrily. "That's why my money is held up." While he lived comfortably off her back, Thornton struggled to pay her rent and sometimes even to buy groceries. It was a sadly familiar story for black artists, a lifetime of performing, of making others rich, only to find herself penniless in middle age. Willie Mae Thornton had started out dirt poor in Alabama. Now, after 4 decades in music, she was confronting poverty yet again. As she put it, reflecting on her early days sleeping in all-night diners and begging for food, "I was practically back right where I had started." To make matters worse, Thornton's doctors delivered a grim diagnosis around this time. She was suffering from serious illness, reportedly cancer, in addition to her cirrhosis. It was as if every hardship she'd ever sung about had come to lodge in her bones. True to her blues, Big Mama met the bad news with stoic resolve. She hardly slowed down. In 1980, despite everything, she made what many consider her last great stand on stage. At the Newport Jazz Festival that year, Big Mama, clad in a dapper 3-piece men's suit, hair neatly coiffed, gold watch gleaming on her wrist, stepped out before the audience, frail but ready to give it absolutely everything. Legend has it she looked at the prepared set list of songs and flung it aside. Instead, she told the band to follow her lead and then sang straight from her soul, calling out blues standards and spirituals on a whim, talking directly to the crowd between verses about life, love, God, whatever moved her. People who witnessed that Newport set say it was transcendent. Big Mama turning a formal festival stage into her own living room jam, effectively saying, "I'll sing what I feel like singing." And sing she did. In 1983, as if by some cosmic grace, Big Mama had one final moment in the spotlight. She was invited to perform at the Newport Jazz Festival once again, this time on a special bill alongside her old friends and fellow blues titans Muddy Waters and B.B. King. It was a kind of living summit of the blues, recorded for an album. Thornton, though extremely ill, she had to travel with a nurse by then, wasn't about to miss sharing the stage with Muddy and the others. She summoned her strength and delivered a set that reviewers called spirited if a bit heartbreaking. Seeing the once indestructible Big Mama looking thin and tentative tugged at the audience's heart. She was clearly struggling against impossible odds. But when she launched into her old gospel favourite Down by the Riverside, her face lit up in a smile and her voice found its old confident tone. The blues could still lift her, even in her twilight. Less than a year later, the end came quietly. On July 25th, 1984, Willie Mae Thornton died alone in a small upstairs room of a Los Angeles boarding house. She was just 57, though a lifetime of rough living made her seem older. The official cause was listed as heart failure, with liver disorder as a contributing factor. In truth, Big Mama's body had been giving out for a long time, ravaged by alcohol, by neglect, by sheer wear and tear, from decades on the road. The news of her passing barely merited a brief in the mainstream press, but those who knew understood the poignancy. The woman who had helped birth rock and roll died in obscurity, far from the spotlight that Elvis and Janis basked in at the time of their deaths. There was no fortune left behind, no estate to speak of. In fact, Big Mama Thornton was laid to rest in a pauper's grave at Inglewood Park Cemetery in Los Angeles, sharing a modest tombstone with two other unrelated indigent souls. Quite an extraordinary situation in the late 20th century, deep into the era of popular culture and celebrity, that a woman who had contributed so much to popular music was buried like it was still the 19th century. It was a heartbreaking coda. In the end, Big Mama seemed tragically small. Even her legendary nickname seemed cruelly inverted by fate. The robust, larger-than-life figure had wasted away to under 100 pounds in her final months. The toll of her struggles could be measured in that tragic weight loss, from roughly 450 pounds at her peak to just 95 at her death. It was as if the blues had literally consumed her. At her funeral, at least, friends and fellow musicians gathered to pay tribute. The service was fittingly led by Johnny Otis, the bandleader who had taken her to the Apollo so many years before and was now an ordained minister. He spoke of Willie Mae Thornton's place in music history, calling her a trailblazer who kicked down the door for rock and roll. There were tears and there was laughter. Surely Big Mama would have insisted on both. The mourners reminisced about her toughness and humour, how she would joke that if she hadn't been a singer, she'd have made a fine prize fighter, how she could curse out a man 1 minute and sing the Lord's Prayer the next. In the years after her death, recognition slowly began to catch up with her importance. That same year, 1984, Big Mama Thornton was inducted into the Blues Hall of Fame, and this ensured her name would not be forgotten in the blues world. Perhaps the most gratifying posthumous honour came only recently. In 2024, 4 decades after her death, Big Mama Thornton was finally and probably begrudgingly given Jan Wenner's views on women and black artists, inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in the early influence category. The Hall citation praised her as, quote, the blues singer whose voice and attitude helped birth rock and roll, explicitly noting the significance of her recordings of Hound Dog and Ball and Chain. It was a long overdue moment of validation, yet numbers and awards only tell part of the story. Big Mama's true legacy lives in the power of her voice, a voice that can still startle a listener decades later. Play her 1953 Hound Dog, and you hear the prototype of rock's snarl. Spin her live, Ball and Chain, and you hear Janis Joplin's entire style foretold in those anguished moans. Listen to the way she slings verses in Rock Me Baby, or croons a gospel line in Oh Happy Day. Behind it all is a life lived fully. Big Mama didn't just sing the blues, she bloody well was the blues. As she once explained in her plain-spoken way, The blues isn't a style, it's just life. Blues or not, she was happy despite it all. I've been happy. There have been dull moments, Big Mama said late in life, but you have to take it as worse as you're gonna get it. And I've been happy, and I'd like to stay that way. Today, anyone who truly knows the history of rock and blues knows the name Big Mama Thornton. They know that the king of rock and roll wouldn't have had a throne without the Queen belting out Hound Dog first. They know that Janis Joplin's breakout moment was essentially a love letter to Big Mama. They know that Willie Mae Thornton stood tall, literally and figuratively, at a time when the music industry had little space for black women who didn't fit its cookie-cutter image. And by sheer force of talent and will, she carved out a space of her own. She was intimidating, hilarious, uncompromising, and strangely vulnerable all at once. Big Mama gave voice to something universal, the notion that suffering can be both lamented and transcended through song. So this was very enjoyable to research and write, and as always, the best part was listening to all her records as I did so. Let me know if you have a favourite of hers down in the comments. Also, this bonus video came about thanks to a poll I ran for all the subscribers of Rock and Roll Mysteries. I'll be doing more polls like that one in future, so if you want to join in and vote next time, make sure you are subscribed so you can participate. Right, I'm off to listen to some blues in the bathtub, because that's where a lot of those tracks were recorded, in the bathroom. Marvellous acoustics in there. I've been Chester, have a good one, and see you next time.